Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to share this topic. I think for most of us, many of us at least, AI has been top of mind for anyone who's a decision maker, a board member, or senior management within an organization. However, this technology, particularly for companies that are in highly regulated categories, can be a little challenging. It can present some inherent risks for those types of institutions, and how do they handle sensitive information and other types of regulated data, particularly when you think about generative AI and some of the hidden use of data in those types of instances. Since 2018, the AI think tank has facilitated engagement between global financial institutions, government regulators, and technologists in the AI sector. Their mission is to empower regulated industries to harness the transformative power of artificial intelligence while navigating those inherent risks that we all are concerned about in our business. Today, the AI think tank will share how to assess your organization's readiness for AI. And this discussion will be curated by CEO and founder of the AI think tank, Greg Woolf, and advisory member, Brian Allen. The session is meant to be collaborative. We encourage questions and discussion throughout. While we ask that you mute your mic when not speaking, please ask questions by either raising your hand, using the hand icon at the top of your screen, and we'll call on you and you can unmute and ask your question then, or you can use the chat feature and put your questions in the chat, and I will wait for a moment to interrupt and ask questions that are provided by these participants. So for those of you that aren't familiar with us, I'm part of Next Level Catapult. I'm one of the co-founders here. We're a management consulting firm, an executive leadership and coaching organization. We have a wide range of partners that we work with to ensure that our clients are up to date in all the most kind of controversial and innovative areas that are impacting their business. And we've had a partnership with the AI think tank for a while now. Really excited to bring this topic to this group. This is an area we get asked about a lot by CEOs, probably CEOs more than anything. You would think CTOs are kind of the most kind of contemplative when it comes to AI use, but when you're thinking about executive roles, particularly CEO role, they have to really think about long-term vision and how to apply new technologies and how the application of those technologies can create risk within their organization. So I think this is a really interesting topic. It's something that we've had a lot of questions around from our clients. So we're glad that many of you were able to join today. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Greg and Brian and let them walk you through this session on assessing your readiness for AI deployments.
That's great. Thank you. Well, thank you firstly, Brad and Next Level Catapult for having us here today. It's great to be part of this group and this discussion. And also thank you to all the attendees. Appreciate you folks giving us an hour of your time to talk about this important subject, and to Brian, my co-presenter here, and sharing his information and knowledge with us. Great to see a lot of folks in the audience here who we know from the AI community and the fintech communities, especially around Boston. But for those folks I haven't met, my name's Greg Woolf, originally from South Africa, so no need to guess on the accent. Came here in the mid-90s. My entry point to the USA was actually at PwC in Boston, and where I worked in the assurance and the financial services practice. Since then, I founded 3 companies, all in the data analytics and AI space, and most recently the AI think tank. And I'll get a little bit more into the background around that. Just one other thing is that I've been fortunate to win a number of awards for innovations, particularly in the fintech space, not just from industry like folks like the AI Global magazine, but also from some of the government programs. There was a tech sprint that was hosted by the FDIC a couple of years ago, and one of our companies won one of the 3 top awards there. So we've been very focused on regulated industries, and particularly data analytics and the modern version of that, which is AI. And as Brad said, focusing our strategies to come from the top and help senior executives and boards get an understanding of this new paradigm. And I'm thrilled to introduce Brian, my colleague over here, and let him give you his background. And Brian will be sharing a lot of his insights with us today.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. So I spent 14 years as a chief security officer at Time Warner Cable. Today, I work at the Bank Policy Institute. We represent the top 40 banks in front of the regulators, Congress, on a variety of things, AI-related, cyber fraud, et cetera, the advancing technologies, quantum. I have to do the legal thing. These are my opinions. They're not BPI's. They are not our members. Um, I spent some time at EY. I worked with boards at large organizations on their technology strategies, their cyber strategies, their cyber risk management strategies. I've written a couple books on cyber risk management, mainly about building programs to meet and manage or the changing and developing oversight obligations for executives. And today I'm a think tank advisor. So appreciate being here.
Great to have you. Thanks. So let me give you just a little snapshot about the think tank and some of the background here for folks who haven't not familiar with the genesis. And for folks who've been part of this genesis, you're welcome to chime in and add some comments, particularly Jim, I guess. Good to see you here. But about 6 years ago, 2018 timeframe, I connected with a gentleman in the Boston ecosystem who is also one of our advisory members. He was the former director of the SEC Southeast region, and he had moved up to New York City, where he was running risk and compliance at Merrill Lynch, and then had come up to Boston to run risk at Fidelity. And being very active in the fintech ecosystem, we got into a dialogue around AI, which 6 years ago was far less mature than it is today. But we saw this coming, and we landed up putting together a group of very senior executives, initially in the financial services space, some of the big kind of name brand financial services firms. These are folks who'd seen mobile and social and cloud come through the organization, and they were looking at this new AI thing to see, what the progress would be. And then we also got introduced to the Fed. So, hi Jim, good to see you here. And the Fed it kind of gave us, having folks like Jim and other people, the former comptroller of the currency, and eventually, over the years, I think we've had the OCC, FinCEN, NCUA, a bunch of kind of financial services regulators participate in our think tank discussions. And we actually saw kind of real interest and willingness for participation between technologists, governments, and financial institutions to talk about this kind of AI paradigm. And just a couple of milestones. So, at one point, the guy from Fidelity and I were actually invited down to DC, where we briefed the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee on the potential for AI to particularly modernize anti-money laundering, which is a really significant part of the financial infrastructure. We landed up authoring a letter, which was signed by 14 members of Congress, 7 on either side. And that letter was sent to at the time, the head of the Financial Crimes Division in the Treasury Department, which precipitated a hearing around the potential for AI, which ultimately led to an inclusion in an act, the 2019 Counter Act, paragraph 305, advocating for the Treasury Department to undertake a study around how AI could be used to modernize. And this is AI from 2018, 2019 timeframe. So if you go to our website, AI RegRisk.com, and look at the background page, you can actually see some of the artifacts. You can see the video of Senator Mark Warner during the hearing asking some of the questions that we proposed. You can see the letter, and you can actually see the act. So for me, it was just really amazing. This guy from South Africa comes here and gets involved in the ecosystem and starts to see the willingness and the impact of collaborating around this new technology, specifically AI. So the think tank essentially has two main kind of directions, if you will, and I like to call it the .org and the .com. The .org is really continuing that mission around bridging education between technologists, regulators, and institutions, especially these days in the world of generative AI. Ideally, with promoting institutions that are supporting AI safety, like the Responsible AI Institute, and some of the other NIST and some of the other organizations that are doing amazing work in the space. And ultimately, continuing to be engaged with government agencies. I've presented many times at the OCC and other agencies around this technology and what it is and what the potential is. We also have a .com side of things, which is a for-profit consulting group. And what we do there is we take best practices that we've learned from large publicly regulated enterprises, and many of whom have strong AI and risk management and strategy protocols in place. But our goal is to take those capabilities and distill them down to make this more generally available beyond financial services into other regulated industries, as well as unregulated industries, and also to bring it down to kind of mid-sized institutions, whether in a regulated industry or even in unregulated industries. Just given that the challenges around getting the balance, the very delicate balance, the risk-reward balance around AI strategy is such a challenge in the industry these days. And we've learned a lot from previous experience and learned a lot from these large financial institutions. So that our mission is to help distill that and bring that to organizations and make it tractable for everybody. Okay, so the rest of this conversation, any questions about the background at this point, anybody? Before we jump into some of the discussion here. So the rest of the session, I have 5 questions that I'm going to pose to Brian and tap into his expertise. Certainly would love for you folks to jump in if you've got questions, if you've got answers. This topic is vastly evolving. It's nascent. It's really interesting. It's almost like a dream come true after following AI for decades to actually see this come into mainstream. But the format from now on is really, I'd like to just kind of ask Brian some questions to get the conversation going. So question number 1, how does AI compare to other technologies? So Brian, when we look at this chart, right, we can see that adoption of new technology is happening at an accelerated pace. The internet, and this is extracted from a study done by Techopedia, the internet took 7 years to get to 100 million users. So from like 91 to 98. Instagram took 30 months, 2.5 years to get to 100 million users. ChatGPT, less than 2 months. So how does this compare? Like, this feels like a really accelerated pace. What can we do? What are your thoughts around this, Brian?
So let me hit on this from like a macro and a micro standpoint, right? So we have these new technologies. It's clearly moving fast. And you think about, what has changed quite a bit since November 22, I think it was, with ChatGPT and 3.5. And you can see on this chart, the adoption rates were magnificent. From a macro standpoint, I think this is what we're going to see with technology moving forward, right? We've just dabbled into, the 4th industrial revolution, really started the 2010s. But if you go back to the 3rd industrial revolution, information technology started in the 1950s. And so, 70 years later, we can see this advancement and where we are. What we are, and I think the takeaway here is that this kind of transformation of what we saw with GPT November is what we're going to see. The chairman of the World Economic Forum talks a lot about exponential growth and advancements that are going to happen, with quantum on the way and these advancements of AI and just how fast this technology is changing. And I think the takeaway is that we can't, we've just went through 70 years of the 3rd industrial revolution and cyber and information technology and all that comes around with it. This is different, right? The mindset has to be different. The adoption is going to be different. The need for speed, the pressures for speed that the market is putting on companies is going to change a lot. And I'll just share, we had a big summit with CIOs, and we asked them their top 3 risks of AI, and to a T, all of them said, moving too slow. And, the reason for that is, you could have IT failures, but you could also have competition overtake you. And that is the kind of pressure that we're starting to see with digitalization and transformation. And that is going to require a new mindset. And so, when I think about these technologies and, what do you compare it to? You could do this macro look and see how fast was this adopted. But I this micro look and how fast different technologies are adopted. But I think the more important piece is that, we are in a transformational time, and it's not just AI. This is, we can touch this one and feel it, but this is where we are going, which is going to require this change in mindset.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of really good themes here. So macro versus micro is a good one. You know, we hear from folks, senior leadership, and that there's a lot of narrative around AI from a conceptual perspective. It's going to create this amount of value and this amount of growth and productivity and all that stuff. But I think where people are really struggling is to kind of bring it to a tractable, practical, tangible level. So that transition from macro to micro. Brian, you've been one, and you know, we were together recently on a working group with the Federal Reserve, unrelated to this, and around information sharing in the industry. And from the beginning, you said, I remember you said, you need to address new technologies at a senior level, come in at a board level, right, and then push it down. What's your thinking and motivation behind that, and what does that look like, kind of with a new technology, maybe contrasting it to, for instance, cyber?
Yeah, I think so. Having lived in that cyber world for a long time, what happens often is, the practice of cyber, the practice of implementation becomes very tactical, and it misses this strategic element that, practice in cyber became, they're seen as tacticians. It's seen as, that this is a tactical component, where what we have seen over the last like 15 to 20 years in cyber is this bifurcation of, yes, it's tactical. Yes, there are these elements of practice, but this strategic element of, what is the balance of risk and reward that is in a business, right? Who owns that balance, right? What is the practice of that balance? And I think the failure that we saw with cyber in a lot of ways was that not only was this, the practice just seen as this cyber element, and it took this kind of 20 years for regulators and the courts to catch up, that, these are business risks, and that feels like an old term. But this ad hoc approach of, this ad hoc approach of, well, we have a committee and we talk about it, or, we get these metrics and they're received, but it does not establish, what is that balance of the business that is programmatic. And, that I think that's what the executives own, is establishing the program, right? The program of, like, what are you governing? Not that you have governance, but what is it that you're governing? And really what the executives are governing should be this expectation of, how does the program itself get you to tolerance, right? And I know this, sometimes this can feel academic, but it is really practice. In a lot of ways, it's no different than establishing a budget, right? A budget is a risk practice too. How much money can I put towards security and resilience versus research and development versus, putting money away for an acquisition? There's a lot of practice that goes around that. It's a trusted process, and you get there. Right? Because this change of speed of digitalization is going to need this programmatic type of approach. And that has to start with the CEO, the executives in ownership of, not just, hey, can we, should we, what is this technology? But how do you get to that balance? Because there are so many unknowns that are coming, and change and speed, that the ad hoc approach that we saw with cyber is not going to work. And quite frankly, it's taken a long time for the regulators and the courts to get there. And they got there for a reason, because, there isn't a zero risk environment. And so the point here is that there's practice that can be put around here, and it is the executive's ownership to own, what does that practice, like, what is that program? What does the practice look like? How granular is it and appropriate for the business?
I have a question, if you wouldn't mind, Greg or
Yeah.
Brian, either one of you. So, in the past, because technology took years or decades sometimes to be adopted at a corporate level, I think you found a lot of executives and boards who outsourced the expertise, right? They'd bring in a CTO that knew the thing, or a head of marketing that knew the social platform, to be that guide. Has that changed now? Right, 2 months to get to 100 million users for ChatGPT. How has that changed, or how should it be changing in terms of who has to have ownership over being the expert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, let me respond to that, Brian,
Yeah.
and then you can do it in more detail. I don't think we have the time in the industry to really build out. I mean, you're hearing about people setting up their AI stack, hiring a head of AI, and building out a whole organization underneath that. The problem is this technology is coming to market so quickly, and in our next slide we'll talk about the adoption rates, which are still fairly low, but exponential means that it can happen much faster. So I think one of the value propositions that we're seeing with the folks that we're advising is how to leverage existing capabilities and infrastructure, so that an organization is ready for rapid adoption in a very practical fashion, as Brian says, right? A balanced program, shifting from theory to practice in a safe way with guidelines. Brian, I'm sure you have a lot more to add in terms of the governance structure.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like when you use the word ownership, like who owns it, that has been a point of confusion, I think, for a lot of organizations. So, do you own the technology? Do you own the data? Do you own the business process? Right? And that is and so what do the executives own in this? And there has been, like, when you get to cyber, you kind of know where that sits. When you get to, a data center, you kind of know of who owns that and where this exists. What we've seen with AI is that it sprawls so fast and so quickly on that everybody has to play this role, right? Is playing a role. The amount of use cases that we're seeing in every department and capability, and people want to touch it and they want to implement it, and it really kind of goes back to why we need this programmatic approach. Is that it is sprawling. It is going to continue to change. The risks are going to continue to change. And so setting up a process to be able to work through prioritization, right? What is that balance of risk reward, which is speed to market, which is, being aware, being informed, that part has to have, some programmatic and practical element to it. And I think the ownership, when you said the word ownership, that was the first source of confusion that we saw at big organizations, where it was, at first people were raising their hand like, hey, I want to own it, and then there was this quick realization of, I don't own this alone, right? And that's an important recognition.
Yep. Let's talk about the current adoption in AI. So it's still early days, right? Here's a stat that we got the other day. It looks like only 6% or so, let's say less than 10% of AI solutions, particularly generative AI solutions, have actually made it into production. I understand what you said a minute ago about managing the sprawl, right? AI is a horizontal technology. So, Brad, going back to what you said, putting in a social media program that's, pretty much focused on the marketing department, with obviously some kind of laying into the client service and sales. But because of the potential for AI to be so widespread, there's a lot of concern about managing the sprawl. Brian, what do you think? What is the current status today? What are concerns, and why is it such a low level at this point?
Yeah, I think that, all the excitement, and I want to call it hype, because, the hype, I think, in a lot of ways was deserving, is, now there's this focus on, what is the business case, right? Like, is there efficiency? How much is the efficiency? This takes resources. It takes time. It takes people time. There are a lot of risks that come along with this. There's unknowns of, like, explainability, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But what we are starting to see now is this really narrow focus of, like, organizations heat mapping a bit, right? What is the expected efficiency of, or the business effect of implementing, and what are the risks? And so if you have high efficiency and low risk, that makes sense. We can put that in place. Let's start learning, how do we keep informed that this is working? And I almost think it takes this, like, ground truth a little bit that has taken for organizations to get there, because it became like the spaghetti on a wall where, hey, we could use it over here and we could use it over here, which was good. Without this kind of true understanding of what does it take, and slow down. Oh, wait, that's our IP. Are we using other people's IP? And then it became this little bit of a crawl of, hey, don't use this because we don't understand the risks yet. And I think what you're seeing today is this kind of really true focus of, okay, let's put all the use cases on the table. Let's start mapping them of value. Let's start mapping them of risks of what we don't want to touch yet. But that's been a practice that we've seen, which is, I think, why you see this slow adoption. And one other reason too, I think, because of some of the risks that are unknown, like the IP issues, like what does transparency mean? Are you getting into a point of explainability? Do you need to notify your customers, or that you are using some AI model? Is a very conservative lean right now because of the unknowns, and I think that'll start changing too. I think once there's more clarity of one, the prioritization of what it means to the organization, what how fast are your competitors moving, and then two, we do need that there is a need for clarity on what do a lot of these liabilities mean. There's tons of state legislation that's in proposal form, right? And so I think we will see clarity over the next year or so. That'll drive this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the unknown risks, right? There's all this potential. Everybody's excited to do this, but the unknown risks from the folks that we've spoken to, especially in the regulated space, seems to be putting a hold on moving things beyond kind of initial exploration. You've always said that the ability to manage risk is a competitive advantage, right? So nothing comes without risk in the business context. So being able to understand, put guidelines in place, and then move ahead, being able to quantify, monitor, report on that risk, I think sounds like a really good approach. Could you talk a little bit about what's going on in the kind of the legal side with AI, given that it's just evolving so quickly?
Yeah. So from two aspects. One, I want to hit on oversight, because this is, I think, a trend that we're seeing that is not going to stop. And that is, we'll take something out of the cyber playbook that we're seeing take shape over the last 5 years. And that was, this bifurcation of responsibility. Are you dotting your I's? Are you crossing your T's? Are you not negligent, right? That is, are you following best practice? And then and now we're starting to see this oversight obligation from the SEC. The courts are taking shape. The SolarWinds case, I know part of it was, it was an appeal that was held up, but the fundamentals of this are not going to change. And that is, do you have the right oversight governance, right? Are you governing? You don't have to make all the right decisions, but that practice, that you have a programmatic, risk practice in place that puts you in a position to make a good decision, not that you did or did not make a good decision. The courts, the SEC, the regulators are starting to look at that, and they're starting with that in the within the AI space. And so, that should be a core focus of establishing a programmatic approach to this. The second thing is, from a liability standpoint, is so explainability. If Humana was sued, and some of the basis of that was a lack of explainability, right? So they used AI, they were using it for analysis, they made some decisions, and AI models themselves are black boxes, right? There's a lot of unknown there. It doesn't mean it can't be used, but there needs to be practice put in place in order to be able to interpret what was your intention of getting there. How can you interpret you got from A to B? Have you tested it, right? So do you have enough practice around that so that you're in a position to say, we can interpret how we got here. I think we're going to see, a lot of issues around privacy that are coming up. So a lot of the state statutes that they're hitting on right now are clearly biased. Any discriminatory processes, privacy, and they're starting to sprawl. And we're probably looking at 20 state pieces of legislation that are out there. So the balance, so it doesn't mean don't use it, right? This is balance of risk reward. This is very manageable, but it's not manageable in this ad hoc, hey, let's pass this. Let's just throw stuff at the wall and pick some and see how that works, right? It is about this tolerance piece and how you get there that, again, can feel academic, but it is not. It is really about true practice.
Yeah, I mean,
follow-up question there, if you wouldn't mind. So your last slide showed, I think, about 6 or 7% adoption, or 6% of projects in production. But what we've seen is that adoption of actually using some of the more ubiquitous tools like ChatGPT are well north of that. Those kind of undisclosed uses by individuals within organizations. At least 90+% of the companies we work with, AI is being used in the organization in some way, and many of those ways aren't specced out or disclosed by the individual using them. Again, ChatGPT being kind of the most common one. How should particularly CEOs, but also heads of risk and legal, be protecting the organization for those kind of undisclosed uses?
Yeah, great question. They're going to use it, right? It is about awareness and controls, and even like putting the parameters. We talked about parameters and balance and tolerance. That is all these, these bollards that kind of keep the employees, right? So there needs to be policy and awareness and training, but it all has to fit within that balance, knowing that they are going to use it. Right, your third parties too, right? That has been a core focus, for IT risk, cyber risk over the last 5 or 6 years, because you're dependent on them. Same thing with like small tools, like I want to say small tool, but like Copilot, right? I mean, if you don't communicate, like if you don't have a clear understanding about what your balance is about using IP and generative AI tools and LLMs, they're going to use it. And so, that's this, more thorough conversation about establishing parameters, because those parameters, tolerance, allows for, training capabilities. And what does that mean? It gives this strategic direction. And that is where the executives really need to sit.
So Brian, we had a question come in as you were talking about Copilot that involved Copilot. So I want to, get this question out. So this is from William. He asked, can you please talk about the distinction between AI that is embedded in technologies that we use, like Copilot, spell check, natural language processing, versus generative AI or machine learning?
Yeah. So like Copilot and tools like that, right? If you start putting your own content, your intellectual property, your customer data into, spreadsheets or into a PowerPoint, that information gets uploaded, and it depends on, is it a huge risk for you? Like what's intellectual property that's critical, versus the efficiencies of letting your employee base use it, find efficiency, put out a better product for the customer. The initial reaction that we saw with a lot of businesses, shut off Copilot, and it really wasn't, and even Bing, right? Because it was embedding ChatGPT in there. Was it realistic? Like, did it reduce harm? Did it reduce risk? I think we know enough right now about how companies use this and do use it, and it really comes down to a training component at this point of, yes, you can use it. These are the risks where you don't. Just like use cases in other technologies, or how you use technology within a company. We are seeing a practice in prompting guidelines, which is fairly new, so that if a company is going to allow their employees use generative AI and LLMs, that they put some guidelines on what it can and cannot do, what you can and cannot do, so that you don't intentionally or unintentionally pull out data that you don't want circulating in your environment, or may inherently include bias because of the way that the prompt was executed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're gonna see AI built into a lot of third-party tools, and building in contractual language into all that on the parties that you're relying on is going to be critically important. Sorry, Greg.
No, I agree, and I think, Bill, I mean, to add to your question here, I think just the widespread awareness of generative AI is actually doing a lot of good for the industry. In the traditional AI, whether you call it analytical AI or deterministic AI, the old-fashioned AI of, is this fraud? what's the credit score? You know, it comes up with an answer as opposed to making things up, which is what generative AI does. So I'd say horses for courses. From a practitioner's perspective, you know, as Brian said, prompting guidelines is really interesting, and I think building some solutions at an enterprise level. If 90% of the people in your organization are using ChatGPT or some kind of equivalent, then how do you, one, make sure that they're using it properly, and two, make sure that they can rely on the answers? And a lot of that comes from prompting. So, you know, one of the protocols we have is around prompting guidelines, right? And also reviewing the answers to determine the efficacy of those answers, looking for transparency and all those challenges. The other piece is, you know, it's also shone a spotlight on the traditional AI, right? The more deterministic AI. So for instance, one of the solutions that we work with is a company that's actually invented a product that creates a high definition image of a traditional AI algorithm. So the way AI works is you give it a bunch of data and it learns some patterns, and then you give it a new data point and you say, what is the expectation? So let's take fraud. You give it a bunch of fraud and not fraud scenarios, and then you give it a new scenario and you say, somebody just, you know, open up this credit card or use my credit card at a gas station. Was that fraud or not? And what it does is it goes and it looks at what it knows, previous examples of fraud, and makes a guess based on its likelihood of how similar is this new data point to the data point they'd used to train and validate the model. Turns out that if there's actually a shape, there's a mathematical shape behind the scenes as to what that determination capability looks like. So if you give it a transaction that looks a lot like what it's been trained on, we have a lot of information about Greg driving his car and parking it and filling up at, you know, gas stations in these kind of areas. It's really good at making that prediction. But if it gets somebody very different from what the model's been trained with in terms of the example sets, it's going to make a prediction, but the veracity of that prediction, the accuracy of that prediction could be much lower. So this is a really interesting technology because it looks at traditional machine learning, as you say in your question, and it's not generative AI. We're not looking for kind of hallucinations, right? But even a traditional algorithm has the ability to kind of hallucinate by making a prediction where the confidence in that score is less than it would be because it's not really well aligned with the training data set. So I know that's a little technical, but I guess the answer is, I think there's definitely protocols that need to be implemented for generative AI and for traditional machine learning. And the overall awareness of this has actually, I think, improved the ability to assess the usability of these tools across the board. I hope that answered the question. Okay. Should we go to the next question?
Sorry, there's one follow-up here. So from a governance standpoint, for many of these tools, Copilot is a great example. You cannot turn it off. How do you govern?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bill. So how do you govern, right? I would start with when we think about, have you mapped the risks to the use of Copilot? And that has to be put in context, right? Because there are going to be easy uses of Copilot that don't carry any risks at all. You're going to have some areas, and probably some areas in certain departments, that are going to carry more risk. And, just like context is going to be really critical, because you can't look at it. You can't look at this broad technology and say, hey, we can, we should, we shouldn't, without context. Because, that is where this is going to really, allow, like, when we talk about governance and the risk management piece and getting granular, like, and what is the executive's role with governance and what is governing, part of that is granularity, right? How granular do you need to put this practice into your business for, for all the employees to see, to all the employees to understand, tolerance for management to understand, so that they can train? All of that is going to drive policies, procedures. And, this feels kind of broad, but this technology is going to need context in just about every single department of what data is going in. We'll say, hey, we use it for efficiency. For what department? For HR? Well, we're going to put employment data in there. We're going to put, salary data there, or efficiency because, people can take notes and, and make meetings more efficient and be able to keep people more informed, right? Two very different things. And so, if you can't turn off Copilot, some people have like changed platforms, and we've seen that. But it's going to get down to, really getting into what is your use case, what is the context, what is the benefit, what is the risk. You can manage this through policy. It may not be the best control, but you can manage it through a simple policy.
Yeah, I mean, Bill, great question again. I think this is actually the question I was about to ask Brian, and that is, how do you manage this, right? How do you manage the downside and the risk? Is there anything else that you'd want to kind of expand on that? I mean, what are you hearing from CEOs when you talk to them about their confidence in the ability to bring AI into an organization?
I think they're seeing incredible confidence, right? When we had these conversations with CIOs, and they say, the biggest risk is moving too slow, that's coming from the market, right? The market is putting pressure on businesses to find efficiencies to move forward. And so, the confidence may not be that there isn't zero risk, right? The confidence is that, hey, I trust that we can get to the appropriate level of risk to move faster. You have to take on risk to be in business, right? It's a necessity. And so what does that mean, right? How do you get to, and I just want to talk about downside, right? There's tremendous upside to all of this in competition and value and efficiency and, in being more in productivity. And so, at first, when we had this, here's AI, right? Everyone was looking at it like, should we implement AI? And now there's this really narrow focus on, tell me the context, right? What is tell me the benefit. Can we make money? How much money? Did we save more money than this one over here? Because we're going to start on that one. And so, the analogy to cyber, I think in a lot of ways is that, everyone built a product and then they went to cyber and they said, okay, now protect it. Right. And we kind of saw that too. We're like, oh, here's AI here, now implement it. Oh, and don't take any risks. Where, really what it comes down to is, tell me how fast you want to move. And then I will tell you, here are the risks that come along with that. Are you okay with that? Oh, maybe we need to slow down a little bit. Or, hey, you know what? We're managing our risk pretty well. Go fast. I know there's a corner and we can see around the corner. I know the latency of my brakes. We're at a good pace. Right. And that's this, and those are that's this programmatic piece that really has to be in place. And so, what we've seen a little bit of things default to the chief data officer or the chief technology officer, in some cases, the cybersecurity leader. When that's the failure part that we saw get corrected in cyber, which was, oh, let this thing default. It's this tactical piece without the front end of what is that balance and what is the practice that actually gets us there. So, a couple practical things. Heat mapping, we're seeing as a really good practice, value versus risk, right? If you haven't taken all your use cases and broke them down to, a specific enough level, that's critical, because the focus now from an executive standpoint is, okay, I have got these pressures to find efficiencies. People are asking what makes sense. That seems simple enough, but have you really gone and, you don't have to level truly granular quantified risk to it, but have you even categorized it to its context, to its use case, something as simple as a high, medium, and low. We are seeing, risk ratings start to be applied, like the EU AI Act has these risk tierings. We're starting to see, conversations of what is high risk and what is moderate risk. And I think heading down a path in that way is easily a good first step. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, I think you're kind of on the right track here. So what are the steps that folks can take to start to assess their readiness? Can you talk a little bit about the survey tool that we've developed and how that's small steps, baby steps, help kind of your thinking behind how that can extrapolate out to a much more effective program.
Yeah, so I think some fundamentals of readiness, right? We talked a lot about about it being programmatic. So what does that mean? And I think there are a couple of areas. Is your technology infrastructure right? Like, is it prepared? Do you have the right tools in place? Do you understand where your data is? Simple things. That's understanding where your data is not a simple thing. I get that. But for fundamental practices, are you ready? Do you understand where the data is, even with third parties, to be able to start implementing? Because that carries its own set of risks. Do you have a clear understanding of what a model is, the benefits of a specific model over another model, the infrastructure that needs to come along with that, the governance and risk practices, right? Not just to set the stage and culture and parameters, but not having that in place carries liability, right? Do you have an understanding of what that means, of where the courts are? Public companies have an obligation. The SEC, talks about, are these enterprise risks? If so, you have this obligation in place, an obligation of disclosure, an obligation like in cyber, you have this obligation to disclose your risk management practice and governance. We are definitely going to see this with AI. The courts are starting to snip away. If AI is critical to your business, you're at that point of having an obligation. And so is that structure in place? And do you have an understanding? And so I think, looking at, breaking down your use case in context. What are the risks that come along with that? Is it an IP risk? Is it a data risk? Is it a reputational risk? Are you have a regulatory risk and exposure? Is there cross use of data? Laws are going to change. So this apparatus, this programmatic component that we've talked about, that's what this readiness survey gets at, is that, it's not this ad hoc, hey, if you do these certain things, it's like, hey, we have a risk register, we've done risk assessments. That's good, but that's not risk management and that's not strategic. And so this survey really gets at the strategic components of are you ready, the core competencies that come along with that.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. Well, we've only got a few minutes left here, so I just wanted to reserve a couple of minutes for any final questions. We have this AI assessment survey tool available. We'll be sending out a link afterwards. It's completely free, and we would encourage anybody interested in doing an assessment of their AI capabilities and their roadmap to go through the survey. It's short, a handful of questions, just to give that kind of initial sense of where they're at and where they could be. And once again, I think the entire program that we've envisaged is a how to get there as fast as possible while maintaining the right risk balance. And that includes a number of elements and components. Firstly, understanding where you are today, understanding what it is you want to do, understanding what already you have in place today, right? Let's leverage cyber infrastructure. Let's leverage some of the other policies, procedures, people to be able to rapidly enable firms to start to dip their toe in the water in a safe fashion, taking what we've learned from the JP Morgans of the world, but distilling it down for any industry of any size, so that folks can kind of take that next step forward. So final slide here, I think, is just thank you. But before we get into that, we'll be sending a survey to everybody afterwards and a link, and you folks are welcome to take it and get your assessment heat map. Any questions? Any comments? I know there's a lot of very capable people on the line who've spent a lot of time on this. Love to get your feedback on this in the last few minutes while we have here, if there's any other things that you wanted to add.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, come off mute, raise your hand, and ask the question. I do have one, if it's okay. I'd like to start with Brian and Greg and all the companies that you've spoken to, who you've helped assess their readiness. Are there any commonalities that you've seen for those who are kind of on the front edge of companies ready for adoption? Is there, what are some of the behaviors or traits that you most commonly see?
From a success standpoint, these centers of excellence that are really governance, right? That are shaping that. Um, for the reason that there are so many unknowns, and so they're constantly working through it, adjusting. um that to me is leaning forward, and that's starting to become, because they're able to look at, hey, can we get to explainability? What does explainability mean, right? They're answering all these questions from a unsuccessful approach. I'll be kind, is not kind of stopping and looking at, what are the priorities, because so much is being thrown at people, and there's either a yes or a no that's being adopted without the principles of, does it fit within these parameters that are the businesses? And so they're not coming at it from a strategic standpoint. It's either this all or nothing from a technology piece. And that is eventually all of those companies get to a let's stop and take five moment. And so the ones that haven't gotten there yet eventually will.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I think most of you folks know that I write a column for digital wealth newsletter called AI Regulations and Risks. And one of the first articles we put out was out of the lab and into the real world, right? AI feels like it's reached a point where it's gotten beyond just experimentation. If folks are giving access to ChatGPT or some third-party vendor product to their data scientists and saying, go play with this and see what you can do, though they're less likely to come up with a successful outcome versus folks that are taking a methodical, programmatic, risk-informed approach to say, okay, strategically, what do we want to do here? Get everybody on board, get the right level of ownership, which doesn't mean necessarily hiring a new head of AI if you don't have one, right? But making sure that the buy-in is consistent across the board and the communication is consistent. I'd say one of the biggest challenges about AI, and this even goes back to the old traditional AI, is ROI, return on investment. A lot of money has been spent on a lot of these projects, and they run at a loss. They never make it to the light of day. 6% is in production, and frankly, the value is not there. So I'd say the culture of looking at, so to answer your question, Brad, the culture of companies looking at AI as a new strategic capability and being able to map that the objectives and the potential value against the potential risks and the downside, and then continue to monitor and report and then set up the appropriate levels of metrics, the appropriate level of performance guidelines. These are the folks that we see that are being meticulous about it and coming at a structured framework approach as opposed to an experimental, let's just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. When the data scientists come back, I think these are the firms that are more strategically aligned internally and seeing a higher rate of adoption and are going to be the leaders in the space when it comes to having AI success stories.
Got it. So for the rest of the group, any questions that we can pose to Brian or Greg? No? So I actually have one final question to follow up on your comment about explainability. Have you seen any companies have done a good job of defining what explainability means to their organization while still understanding there's ambiguity in their ability to explain?
Yeah. Yes. So it's a black box. My head is a black box, right? I don't tell you how the neurons in my brain worked and how I got to that decision. It really comes down to, what data was I looking at? What was my experiences? What is my intention? My output, did I question it? Did I test it? Do I continuously look at problems, right? At changes? And so the answer is yes, but what that is going to take is, as Greg pointed out, is a framework and a practice that is repeatable. Because at some point, right, we're going to make these decisions, we're using it, and somebody asks, well, how did you get there? You're going to be able to, you're going to have to be able to answer how you got there. The level of what that means and technical jargon that you're going to have to use or not is going to depend on the situation. But you're not going to be able to get there by just saying, well, we used ChatGPT and this was, this is our intention. Okay, What data went in? What was that intention, right? Did you have any prompting controls in there? Show me your prompt. So it is going to be around this practice. The answer is yes, this is manageable. It's not manageable if you say, show me your neurons in your brain, you show me the technology within this model. We're not going to get there. We may someday, but if you can get at the intention of explainability, which is, can I interpret how I got from A to B? Do I trust my output? Is it an intended output? Right? I think that is very manageable if it's done programmatically. It's not going to be this ad hoc practice that gets you there.
All right. Well, Brian and Greg, thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and the great work you're doing at AI Think Tank. Appreciate all the contributions you guys are making to the industry. Thank you for everyone who joined us and stayed with us through this entire session. Like Greg said, we are going to send a recap out, and you'll also be getting an email with the ability to take an assessment for your organization. So more to come via email on that within the next day or two. So appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you guys at some of our future webinars. Please check out our website, nextlevelcatapult.com. On our webinar section, we have tons of webinars we give every week. Everything's completely free, and we welcome you to sign up and participate in any one that is interesting to you. So with that, have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the future.
Thanks,
everyone. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.